Chapter 381, Conjectures. With a crackle, branched lightning lit up the early winter night with a silvery white flash. It didn't smite the ground, but instead it tore through the air, illuminating the spot where Klein stood, as if it was daytime, making him stand out. Spellsinger of God, Ace Snake, retracted his gaze. His face was gloomy as he whispered,
"Rose school of thought. It's not a wraith, nor is it an undead creature."
The mature middle-aged man with a pair of golden eyes turned his head to the side to look at Kapim's corpse and said,
"Covering the target's corpse with tarot cards. This is the second time something like this has happened in the past 2 months.
Cardinal Snake asked in a deep voice,
"When was the first instance?"
The mature middle-aged man in the well-ironed formal suit coughed lightly and said,
The time when the true creator attempted to descend into this world with the help of a swindler."
Cardinal Snake made a definite judgment.
Then it's not the Rose School of Thought.
Although those organizations that worshipped evil gods weren't fond of anyone, they wouldn't deliberately foil the plans of their counterparts. Instead, they wished to see their counterparts succeed, waiting for them to make a mess of the situation. The middle-aged man smiled.
"I think so too. Perhaps it's the appearance of a new secret organization. Their characteristic feature is to scatter tarot cards all over the target's body. And the different appearance of the tarot cards imply different meanings. This corpse has 2 cards over his face. One is Judgment, and the other is the Emperor. Judgment is the motive and goal, while the Emperor is the organization's code name. Of course, this might also be a type of ritual."
Cardinal Snake didn't respond as he surveyed the area.
Let's see what exactly happened here.
It was only at this point in time that the first batch of mandated punishers arrived at Kapim's villa. Above the gray fog, having only used paper figurine substitutes thrice and not being pushed to his limits, Klein was about to use divination to confirm Daisy's safety afterward. Holding the spirit pendulum in his left hand, he closed his eyes and silently chanted the sentence,
"Daisy will successfully return home."
After repeating it 7 times, Klein opened his eyes and saw the topaz pendant turning counterclockwise, but it moved with a very slow frequency and a tiny amplitude.
This means that Daisy's journey home will be quite a bumpy one, but almost negligible.
After interpreting the revelation, Klein was relieved of his final concerns. He then looked at the 2 items in front of him, both of which were radiating with a strong spiritual luster. One of them was a light blue, translucent hexagonal pillar. There were traces of light flashing through it, as though it was lightning that came from the depths of one's consciousness. This was the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Ma'am Katie. The other belonged to Parker, who hadn't been able to play a role in the battle. His Beyonder characteristic had condensed into a ball, like a child's fist. This fist was made up of 3 colors, iron black and dark red colors, intertwined with a large swath of silver. Klein didn't hesitate to conjure a pen and paper. He was ready to use these 2 Beyonder characteristics to divine the corresponding potion formulas. Before he advanced to Sequence 7, because of the additional influences that had been left on the Beyonder characteristics he had, it was almost impossible to use divination to determine the formulas. Even if this mysterious space could help him eliminate the interference and increase his divination ability to a certain extent, it still wasn't enough. Therefore, the only method Klein could use, in the past, was mediumship. After he became a magician, he was preliminarily able to determine it using the Beyonder characteristic for a divination above the gray fog. However, there was a high probability of him failing. This time, without exception, Klein had shamelessly failed. However, he also had some gains, and that was to be able to find out the corresponding sequence names of the 2 Beyonder characteristics.
Parker is a Sequence 8 Sheriff, and Katie is a Sequence 7 Interrogator. Aren't these from the Arbiter pathway? This pathway is controlled by the royal family, the military, and a small number of ancient aristocratic families in Lowen. Any leaks of formulas and Beyonder ingredients are dealt with harshly. Could a number of the girls abducted by Kapim be sent to the estate of some aristocrat? But there's no need for them to send 4 Beyonders to help Kapim just to enjoy themselves. It obviously doesn't make sense. Harass is much more powerful than Katie, so perhaps he's a sequence 6 of this pathway. After wearing that glove, he might even be as strong as a sequence 5. Could it be that they're involved in some bloody heretic sacrifice, and the target they seek cannot be exposed? Apart from those on the inside of the kingdom, Potter's Castilla family also possesses this Beyonder pathway, which is then transmitted to their army and intelligence system. Could this be another espionage case of some unknown nature?
Klein tried to divine a few of his conjectures, but he failed again. He temporarily put this matter to the back of his mind and lightly tapped the edge of the long, bronze table as he muttered to himself.
As long as I have the formula, with the corresponding supplementary ingredients, these two Beyonder characteristics will be able to turn a person into a Sequence 8 Sheriff and Sequence 7 Interrogator. Miss Magician's friend, who's called Zio, seems to be lacking the Beyonder ingredients for Sheriff. I can sell Parker's Beyonder characteristic to Miss Magician through the world so that I can quickly amass the money needed for the ingredients of the Faceless Sequence Potion. However, always doing it through the world doesn't seem rather appropriate. I deliberately left the tarot cards this time. If Miss Justice were to hear of this matter, then she would definitely believe that it was done by my blessed. I'll let Mr. Fool do the selling on his behalf.
Klein quickly finalized a plan and made the sheriff and interrogator Beyonder characteristics fly to the corner and hid it among the junk pile.
I wonder what the names are for the Arbiter pathways, Sequence 6 and 5. It seems like something that uses order and laws. Judge?
Klein put away those thoughts and closed his eyes midway to carefully observe his current state. Once again, he felt his spirituality become lively as the potion stirred. He felt that his digestion of the potion had sped up. This time he had confidence, based on his intuition, that he had concluded most of the magician principles. The remaining minutiae were good to have, but it didn't really matter if he lacked them. It didn't significantly affect his digestion process. Conjuring a fountain pen and goatskin, Klein enhanced his memory by writing, The Magician's Principles. 1. Never perform unprepared. 2. Challenge the impossible, even if the final outcome is nothing but an illusion. Klein believed that these were the two core tenets of the magician's principles. Grasping them would be key, and the rest were supplementary for perfection. 3. Take the initiative to perform. 4. Try to get applause from the audience. 5. Wield control of the target's attention. Putting down the dark red fountain pen, Klein skimmed through it and judged them by himself.
Daily acting, together with 3 or 4 proactive acting instances, would be enough to allow me to digest the Magician Potion before New Year's. If I were to challenge an impossible performance during this period, then my progress would be even faster. This is roughly at the speed I wish to achieve.
There were still about 2 months till January 1350. After doing all this, Klein rubbed his temples, prepared to return to the real world. After putting away the Black Emperor card, the biological poison bottle, and other items, he suddenly laughed and said, self-deprecatingly,
Challenge the impossible. Isn't that equivalent to courting death?
As his voice echoed, Klein's figure disappeared from the space above the gray fog. In the cheap hotel in the Backland Bridge area, he suddenly opened his eyes and saw the candlelight of his summoning ritual. After quickly clearing up everything, Klein put on a thick worker's jacket he'd bought for 4 soldi and went to the window. He picked up the sweet iced tea that he had bought earlier and looked at his blurry figure, which was reflected in the window. There was a heartfelt smile on his face as he whispered,
Cheers!
Just as he finished his sentence, he touched the glass with his cup, then lifted his chin and downed it in one gulp. Then he sauntered out of the hotel. The nearby gas lamps were already fully lit up, and pedestrians and carts were bustling about, oblivious to the explosion at the border between the Cherwood Borough and West Borough. Klein strolled around the Bravehearts bar for a while, and at 7:58 he knocked on the door of the Beyonder gathering organized by Eye of Wisdom. He wore an iron mask and a hooded robe, acting completely ordinary. Meanwhile, Shio, who went to various places every night to check on her contacts, saw a sign that had never appeared before. It belonged to the golden-masked man who had sold the sheriff's formula to her at the gathering organized by Mr. A. It was the sign of an emergency meeting.
He hasn't come looking for me all this time, and I've been pretending that it had never happened. Why would he suddenly?
Shio thought for a moment before deciding to take a look. The golden masked man had promised to give her some missions, allowing her to save enough money and exchange it for the corresponding Beyonder ingredients. Therefore, Shio switched areas and marked the time and place of the meeting. Half an hour later, Shio walked out of her hiding place after secretly observing a remote alley that also extended in all directions. She walked towards the golden masked man. The man was still wearing his black tuxedo. His light brown eyes swept over Shio's head.
There's a mission for you.
Shio asked like clockwork.
Difficulty and compensation?
The man nudged his mask, which was forged from gold.
It's not dangerous, but it can be very dangerous. It all depends on what you do. The initial compensation is 30 pounds. If you can acquire useful information, I can even directly give you a Beyonder ingredient corresponding to Sheriff.
Shio said with a frown.
What's the mission?
The golden masked man's gaze turned heavy as he said,
Through the channels available to you, figure out who has recently been keeping tabs on Kapim.
Shio returned with a question.
Kapim, that human trafficker?
The man nodded.
Yes.
Shio immediately refused.
I reject this mission. I hate him.
The man opposite her chuckled.
You aren't working for Kapim, because he's dead.
Shio was instantly stunned.
Dead?
The man added,
He died at home, and his body was covered with tarot cards. There were 2 cards on his face, one Judgment and the other the Emperor. By the way, pay attention to matters in the past few years which have involved tarot cards, but were not reported to the police.
Chapter 382, Hero Bandit, Cherwood Borough, in the house Shio and Fours rented. Fours was just finishing the beginning of her new book and, in her good mood, prepared to reward herself with a cigarette when Shio pushed open the door and entered the study.
Smoking is harmful to your health.
Shio sniffed. Fours didn't argue with her when she saw her puzzled look. Instead, she asked,
Looks like something happened to you?
Shio scratched her rough blonde hair and sat down on a nearby chair.
That person from before contacted me, the person who sold the Sheriff formula to me through another person at Mr. A's gathering. He gave me a relatively simple mission. The initial reward is 30 pounds. I don't even know if there are any hidden dangers.
Force thought for a moment and then said,
That person? There should be an organization behind him, but why would they want to rope you in? Aren't they afraid of being implicated by your intelligence, thus causing the entire organization to be completely destroyed? There's nothing they really need from you either. Your looks are barely passable, but you're too short, so perhaps your life is relatively more valuable. What mission is it?
Zio was used to her good friend's snide remarks as she ignored what she said in the beginning. She directly answered the second question.
Investigate if there has been anyone keeping tabs on Kapim recently.
Fours wasn't a bounty hunter. It was her writer's instinct to gather material, so she often asked Zio to tell her stories and news she had learned.
Kapim? The human trafficker who deserves to be hanged? No, burned to death?
Shio nodded.
It's him, but he's already dead. He seems to have died rather miserably.
Fours asked, pleased and curious.
How did he die? Was he sliced to death by a knife, bit by bit?
Shio thought for 2 seconds before continuing.
That person didn't go into a detailed description. Perhaps it'll be mentioned in the papers tomorrow. He only mentioned a rather special situation at the scene of the death. He said that Kapim's corpse was covered in tarot cards. His face was covered with the Judgment and the Emperor cards. The Judgment card probably meant that it was a judgment on Kapim, and the verdict was death. But what does the Emperor card represent? That murderer? No. That hero's identity?
As a best-selling author, Fours instinctively began interpreting the unique layout of the scene of the crime. Suddenly, she froze. Tarot cards? The corpse was strewn with tarot cards? Fours suddenly thought of the secret organization she had just joined. Tarot Club.
It couldn't be one of us, could it? However, none of the members has the code name of the Emperor. If it's really the case, then this is the first time I've found traces of the Tarot Club in the real world. We're not just a secret organization that only exists above the gray fog.
As Fours' emotions churned, she felt pleasantly surprised and also worried. Under an attendant's lead, Klein entered the familiar activity room. There was only one candle in the room. The dim yellow light made the surroundings look like a scene from a ghost story. Coupled with the black robes and the iron masks worn by the mysterious people, the atmosphere turned even more intense. The moment he stepped in, Klein suddenly had a baffling sensation. He felt the flickering candle flame staring at him. He felt that the flame would burst and ignite his hair and robe. He felt that the curtain behind the oriel window would suddenly flare up, enveloping his body and covering his nose and mouth, forcefully choking him to death.
What's happening?
Klein was stunned as he turned extremely tense. It wasn't a premonition for danger, but a feeling that was hard to avoid. Klein carefully found a seat and sat down. The moment his buttocks touched the surface of the chair, he felt as if the chair would explode and thick wooden thorns would end up piercing through his body. This reminded him of the videos he had seen back on Earth. Due to the explosion of a low-quality gas cylinder under a swivel chair, the steel pole and the debris had stabbed into the seated owner's buttocks, drilling into his abdomen. The whole scene was filled with badly mutilated blood and flesh, a ghastly sight.
Why am I always making such bad associations? Is it because of the damage done to my spirit body from the battle earlier?
Klein looked around thoughtfully and saw that the fat apothecary had still not attended.
What happened? Or has he already left Backland?
Klein murmured something to himself and heard Eye of Wisdom announce the beginning of the gathering. In the course of the next few hours, Klein felt as if the chandelier on the ceiling was going to fall sideways and smash into his head. He thought that the coffee table in front of Eye of Wisdom would suddenly move sideways and stumble him over, and he suspected that the members of the gathering around him were full of malice and might cause him trouble at any moment. It made him fidgety, alert, and puzzled, and he was too distracted to pay attention to deals that either ended in success or failure.
If one is to say that a premonition for danger is like an occasional vibration, reminding one that there's news entering the room or an incoming phone call, then the feeling I have at this moment is akin to an electric drill boring constantly, causing me to be unable to relax or pay attention to anything else.
Klein tried to rub his forehead, but it only touched the cold iron mask. At this moment, he felt as if his iron mask would suddenly cave in and stick close to his face, embedding itself into his brain.
Is it really because my spirit body was damaged so it's making me hallucinate?
Klein frowned. He originally wanted to make a request to buy the thousand-faced hunter's blood and mutated pituitary gland at this meeting, but in such a situation, he could only give up out of caution. Although the level of Eye of Wisdom's gathering wasn't high, and there was a high probability that it wouldn't involve a high-level monster like the thousand-faced hunter, Klein believed that a lot of the members here also attended other gatherings and might be able to come into contact with the relevant information and clues. Amidst his anxiety, Klein attended the gathering as a bystander, just after taking off his robe, removing his mask, and leaving the room. The feeling that everything in the room was going to harm him had instantly disappeared, disappearing in the oddest manner. Klein's pupils shrank, confirming that his previous experiences didn't originate from the damage to his spirit body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have experienced two completely different states, inside and outside. He suspected that there was a person or creature in the activity room of the gathering, one that was invisible, imperceptible, and extremely terrifying. That entity had stimulated his spiritual perception as a seer and his sense of danger as a clown, but because of the entity's suppression or some other special reason, the stimulus appeared in the form of a rich association that failed to make him realize it.
Who could it be? This is too scary. Just the existence itself made me have a reaction similar to the symptoms of losing control.
Without making a sound, Klein left Eye of Wisdom's house and headed toward the nearest street. All of a sudden, he had a guess.
The Bravehearts bar is nearby, and it's also the monitoring area of Wraith Steve, who was killed by Miss Sharon, Merrick, and I. Their deaths would definitely make the Rose School of Thought's high-sequence Beyonder angry, and he would cast his sights over here, towards the Beyonders living near the Bravehearts bar. Was that him? Fortunately, I used the biological poison bottle and the sun brooch tonight, and to prevent myself from being divined, I left them above the gray fog. Otherwise, the result would be unimaginable. The magician who just completed an impossible performance would be killed directly here. The Beyonder world is truly dangerous.
Inside the Holy Wind Cathedral, Cardinal Ace Snake looked at the captain of the mandated Punisher team and asked emotionlessly,
Who is Kapim? Why is there an underground dungeon in his villa?
The captain of the mandated Punisher team replied immediately,
He's a tycoon, one who was rumored to be related to many cases of missing girls. He's suspected of being a human trafficker, and that he is secretly engaged in the slave trade. That underground dungeon proves the rumors.
Cardinal Snake pressed.
Why did a human trafficker receive the protection of so many Beyonders? And their sequences aren't low either.
The captain of the mandated Punisher team replied, somewhat trembling in fear.
Your Eminence, this requires an investigation. We tried using Beyonder means to find clues, but all of them failed.
Cardinal Snake didn't blame him.
I've tried it too.
This member of the Church of Storms' upper echelon paused for a moment before continuing.
Continue to investigate this matter. Also find that sequence 6 or 5 specter.
After his subordinate had left, Cardinal Snake picked up his fountain pen and wrote down in his notebook a number of subjects to pay close attention to. Kapim, human trafficking, tarot card ritual, strange specter without a high sequence, concealed plot. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey was waiting for the maid to cut up the food when she heard her father, Earl Hall, who was used to reading the newspapers at breakfast, laugh.
Kapim is dead.
Audrey asked with her eyes wide open.
Who is he?
In fact, she wasn't the least bit curious about who Kapim was. She was simply going along with her father, who obviously had the desire to share his thoughts. This was both her specialty as a daughter and the innate nature of a telepathist.
He's a tycoon who secretly might be a human trafficker. He has rather good ties with some people. He was killed last night. There were obvious signs of him being judged at the scene of the crime. So the newspapers are calling the murderer a hero bandit. The hero bandit Black Emperor. Oh, they named him after the code name of the rulers of the ancient Solomon Empire.
Hero bandit, Black Emperor, Black Emperor.
Audrey immediately thought of the card of blasphemy belonging to Mr. Fool. This was the item of the highest level she had come into contact with so far. She suddenly became interested in the Kapim murder.
It sounds interesting. Although it's illegal, I still want to say that the hero bandit did beautifully. Oh, Dad, how did it go?
Earl Hall held the newspaper as he described it with a smile.
The police and relevant departments of the church didn't divulge any exact details. I haven't met them either, but this is what's said on the papers. The hero bandit was dressed in black armor and a black crown. He had a cape of the same color behind him. After he entered Kapim's villa, not only did he steal all the valuables in the safe, but he even stole the lives of Kapim and his evil henchmen, rescuing girls who were locked up in the underground dungeon. He scattered tarot cards on Kapim's body, and the most prominent of all were the 2 cards that covered his face. One of them was Judgment, and the other was the Emperor.
Tarot cards, Judgment card, and the Emperor card.
Audrey's eyes suddenly lit up. Chapter 383, Returning Home. Audrey could almost be certain that it had been done by Mr. Fool's Blessed when she heard the description of the familiar scene. She suddenly felt a strong sense of immersion, participation, and pride. That was a human trafficker whose hands were stained with blood and evil. The Judgment card is the retribution enacted against him in the name of justice. Was the verdict hanging, beheading, or burning at the stake? the Emperor should be a symbol of his identity. Was this the Blessed who sneaked into the Royal Museum and stole the Black Emperor card? Audrey let her imagination run wild for a moment. She had intended to press for more information and finer details, but from the look on her father's face, the tone of his voice, and the color of his emotions, she could tell that he still didn't know what was going on. Therefore, she could only suppress her curiosity and planned on asking her good friend, Kanse Larson from MI9.
Although directly asking Kanse about it would suit my image in this aspect, that would still be rather abrupt. It would also conflict with my identity as a noble. I'll get Annie to prepare a few invitations for an afternoon tea party, sending them separately to Glaint, Kanse, Murray, Christine, Jane, and the others. Most of them are interested in mysticism, so they would feel interested in someone known as the Hero Bandit Black Emperor. Under my guidance, they can help me ask a lot of questions that wouldn't be convenient for me to ask. It's decided.
Audrey retracted her attention and nibbled at her breakfast. She believed that Mr. Fool's Blessed wouldn't have dealt with capping purely for the sake of punishing evil, since it wasn't in line with his identity and status. Of course, if Audrey was still the same Audrey who had just joined the Tarot Club a few months ago, then she definitely would have been willing to accept such an explanation. Otherwise, she wouldn't have chosen the Justice card as her symbol. After experiencing so many gatherings and so many matters, she felt that she had matured a lot and was no longer as innocent. She believed that there had to be more important and essential factors behind this matter, such as an evil god or secret organization which Capim was involved in. Audrey thought with anticipation.
I hope Kanse can provide some useful information.
15 Minsk Street. Klein was eating white bread with jam and flipping through today's newspapers. As he read, he almost choked on his own saliva.
What? A safe? It wasn't me. I didn't. Don't spout nonsense.
In his mind, Klein immediately rejected the description of his theft of everything in the safe thrice. The situation had been pressing, and in order to gain clues, all he did was burrow into the safe to see if there were any important documents or evidence despite having found the safe. He didn't take anything, and he quickly left the safe and went to another room. Of course, Klein, in his spirit-body state, had also suffered some damage from the gas explosion, and the total weight of the items he could carry had been greatly reduced. There were only gold bars, jewelry, land deeds, house deeds, antiques, and other items in the safe, which were either not convenient for him to take, or there was no way he could launder them. Klein muttered silently to himself, confirming that it was the subsequent investigators who had divided up all the contents in the safe.
Perhaps he has a place reserved especially for cash, but unfortunately, I didn't find it nor did I have the time to look for it.
He looked at the newspaper, took a sip of Sibe black tea, and slowly exhaled. He smiled inwardly.
Hero Bandit Black Emperor. I like that name.
After breakfast, Klein put on his thick, double-breasted frock coat and half-top hat, and he held a solid black cane. Opening the door, he left Minsk Street for Broken Axe Lane on the boundary of the East Borough. That was where Daisy had disappeared. After finalizing his plans yesterday, and before he committed to his operation, he had deliberately made a trip to Broken Axe Lane to seriously look for clues. He knocked on the doors of the nearby houses and asked if they had seen any girls like Daisy. Although Klein didn't believe that the official Beyonders would think that a poor family would be able to afford a hero bandit who had at least the strength of a Sequence 6, and he believed that there was a higher probability that the investigation would be directed towards the secrets Capim was involved in, supplemented by who had been keeping tabs on Capim recently and other peripheral investigations, he still cautiously decided to put on a show and try his best to play out the entire act. What if one of the Beyonder enforcers lost their mind and planned to make a preliminary investigation in this aspect?
Some families might have some savings and would be able to hire other detectives. The chances of being suspected as a kind-hearted person like me, who just took on the case yesterday, are extremely low. As long as I'm not suspected, they wouldn't compare my performance from the previous Lenavis case. Besides, the Nighthawks were the ones who took action previously and were assisted by the Military Special Department. Kapim's case happened in Sherwood Borough, so the ones taking on the case would likely be the mandated punishers. The communication between the two groups wouldn't be that smooth. Katie and Parker belong to the Arbiter pathway. I wonder if the military will intervene.
As a former Nighthawk, Klein had a sufficient understanding of the modus operandi of the various official organizations, their work styles, and their investigation habits. Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh as he boarded a carriage. He thought,
Simply put, I have excellent anti-detective abilities.
he was going to continue his investigation into Daisy's disappearance. After all, he was an ordinary private detective who hadn't been able to confirm that Daisy's disappearance had anything to do with Kapim. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Daisy returned to the shabby rented apartment under the escort of the police officer in charge of the neighborhood. Along with a few pitiful girls like her, she had been settled into the various cathedrals in Sherwood Borough last night and had been questioned accordingly. It included what they saw when they escaped, what they saw when they looked back, where they lived, what their family situation was, if they knew any friends who were out of the ordinary, and so on and so forth. Daisy, who was still in a state of panic and lingering fear, answered the questions truthfully. After that, no one came to her again. She slept through the night and was sent back to East Borough early in the morning, where she was handed over to the fierce police officer she always saw. Along the way, Daisy didn't dare to say anything. She trembled in fear, and only when she entered the apartment where she lived did she feel a little more at ease. As soon as she stepped through the door, and before she could find her mother and sister through the hanging wet clothes, she heard a scream.
Daisy!
Frigga stopped whatever she was doing and, like a nimble fawn, darted through the clothes hanging in the air and the random things on the ground. She ran to the door and hugged her sister tightly. Then she let go of her hand, and with tears streaming down her cheeks, she sized Daisy up with pleasant surprise and in concern.
Are you all right? It's so wonderful that you're finally back.
Liv also stood up from behind the wash basin. She wiped her hands on her clothes and asked, rubbing her eyes,
Daisy, where have you been these past few days?
At that moment, the police officer interrupted.
She was kidnapped? We rescued her?
Thank you, thank you. You guys are too great.
Liv shed tears and randomly used an adjective. The policeman coughed lightly and said,
That's our duty. Have you met anyone strange in the past few days?
Liv was stunned for a second. Hoping to not be involved in too many matters or get into any trouble, she said,
No, I really haven't.
The policeman waved his hand and said,
Be more careful in the future. Don't take deserted shortcuts again.
He couldn't stand the humidity and the motley of smells, so he turned and left. Liv looked at her daughter again. She took wide strides over to her side and wiped her hands on the side of her clothes before hugging Daisy.
It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back.
She murmured through her tears, not asking if Daisy had been hurt. Daisy relaxed and sobbed. Beside her, Frigga was also crying. She stretched out her arms and hugged her mother and sister respectively. The three of them cried for a while before letting go. Liv wiped her eyes again and said,
Wash the clothes first. There are still a lot of them.
Daisy, who had just been rescued, nodded and quickly threw herself into her busy work. It wasn't until noon, while they were nibbling on their black bread and drinking plain water that could hardly even be considered tea, that Liv finally had time to ask,
Daisy, were you hurt?
Daisy shook her head.
They just hit me a few times.
Frigga mentioned in passing,
That's great. The police rescued you. A kind detective was willing to help search for you for free yesterday, and you ended up returning today. Ah, he still has your vocabulary book.
Already prepared, Liv mentioned,
I'll get old Kohler to get it back and tell the detective you're home so that he won't have to busy himself over this matter. Regardless, we have to thank him again.
Daisy felt relieved as she replied to her sister's question.
No, it wasn't the police. There was a sudden explosion, and the doors that kept us locked up were strangely opened, and we just ran out. However, I did see a gentleman or a lady on the roof. He wore black armor, a crown-like helmet, and a cape. He just stood there watching us quietly. None of those bad guys came to stop us or chase us down.
As a tutor at the free school, Daisy clearly had a richer set of vocabulary than her mother, Liv. Liv answered in shock. By the side, Frigga curiously waited for the answer.
A person dressed like that saved you?
Daisy nodded seriously and said,
Yes, he's like what the bards sing of. A hero!
Frigga ruminated over the word, her eyes as bright as the stars. In a certain secret chamber, a group of people were carefully comparing the Lenevis case with the Capim case, using the information they were given as they searched for similarities between the motives and modus operandi. Someone exclaimed,
The two things cannot be linked together at all. The only thing that they have in common is evil, or rather, evil was defeated. The owner of the tarot card has upheld justice.
Another person's analysis was endorsed by the majority.
It can be confirmed that the two cases didn't involve the same person. The difference in strength is obvious, and what they're good at is even more contrasting. Although it's possible that their sequence had been elevated, Capim's murderer was a kind of specter, or someone that can switch into the spirit-body state. That's not something common.
Therefore, the person who called the meeting concluded,
Two cases, two different people, but they both threw out tarot cards. Perhaps the latter was committing a copycat crime, and if that's the case, we can target the people who are aware of the Lenevis case. The other possibility is that there is an organization symbolized by tarot cards.
Chapter 384. On your own, you check yourself. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. The aroma of Fana Potter's top-quality Mount St. Dursey coffee, blended with the splendid fragrance of the Queen's black tea to create an intoxicating symphony of smells. They lingered around the elegant three-tiered high tea tray that served delicious and delicate desserts. This was the high tea party, organized by Audrey. She had invited her friends of blue blood parentage, all who were fellow enthusiasts in mysticism. They sat around her, talking and laughing. Under Audrey's imperceptible guidance, Jane, Murray, and the others became extremely interested in the Black Emperor, the hero Bandit who had appeared last night. All of them cast their eyes towards the noble-born Conse Learson, who had joined MI9. The sweet-looking Christine asked curiously,
What beyonder powers does that Black Emperor have?
Among the few of them, the lowest rank among their fathers was that of a Viscount. It allowed them to have sufficient status and channels to understand the existence of beyonder powers and potions in their endearing pursuit of mysticism. But just like Audrey before, they were all unwilling to join the Nighthawks, the Mandated Punishers, the Machinery Hive Mind, and MI9. Other than that, the families that they belonged to didn't have histories that traced back to 1,000 years ago, and even the ancient aristocrats that had just been established in the fourth epoch of the Loan Kingdom weren't completely loyal to the royal family or to the upper echelons of the military. They weren't bestowed with any formulas, and even if they had beyonder ingredients, it was unlikely that they could recognize them. They wouldn't even know how to use them even if they did recognize them. This limited the possibility of Murray, Christine, and the others in becoming beyonders. They could only look forward to it, but it was difficult for them to take that crucial step. As for whether or not their elders had collected the potion formulas and nurtured beyonders for their families, that was beyond their purview. After all, this wasn't allowed. If the king were to find out, they could use this as a reason to strip them of their noble titles. Of course, there were already two traitors in the living room, Audrey, who had advanced to Sequence 8 Telepathist, and Viscount Glaint, who had gathered one portion of beyonder ingredients. It wouldn't be long before he became an apothecary. The tall, thin young gentleman, Kanse, took a sip of his coffee and said,
I won't give you a direct answer, I'll just tell you some facts. Other than traces of a gas explosion in the dining room where the battle happened, various means were used to detect poison, substitutes, specter shriek, bullets condensed with holy powers, and other elements. By the way, that Black Emperor, no hero Bandit, was in a specter state.
It doesn't look like the person who had killed Vice Admiral Hurricane Colangos. Nor does it look like the person who had dealt with Lenevis in the sewers. Is the person involved in Capim's case Mr. Fool's third blessed who stole the Black Emperor's card? There are at least 3 blessed in Backland alone. How many blessed does he have, in total?
Audrey's heart skipped a beat as she deliberately asked.
Was there an intense beyonder battle?
Murray, under her lead, asked one step further.
There were beyonders at Kipim's place? Relatively powerful beyonders? And there was more than one?
Viscount Glaint unconsciously expressed his doubt.
He's just a trafficker.
Audrey maintained her faint smile and curious gaze, patiently waiting for Cance's reply. Cance laughed and said,
Murray's guess is correct. I can only say this much. Do you want me to be locked up by Captain?
Kipim's place had more than one relatively powerful beyonder. Indeed, he's not an ordinary human trafficker. He might be involved in many matters regarding mysticism. Human trafficker. Could he be involved in some cult sacrificial rite? Mr. Fool's blessed attacked because of this? It was roughly the same with Lenivus. It involved a cult and sacrifices, as well as the descent of the true creator. I wonder which cult and evil god is behind Kipim. Mr. Fool's goal seems to have always been targeting these evil gods. Is it really strife between the gods? Who knows how many grand schemes of those evil gods he has foiled?
Audrey made many connections as her heart surged with emotions.
Our Tarot Club's enemies are the evil gods. The rest aren't qualified. Does Mr. Fool wish to get the title of the nemesis of evil gods?
Audrey pursed her lips and chuckled softly in her heart. Then she suppressed her emotions and secretly made a confession.
Audrey, how can you do this? How can you use Mr. Fool as a joke?
At noon, when Klein returned to Minsk Street, he found, as he had expected, a letter from old Kohler, who had paid a carriage driver to deliver to his mailbox. This was their agreed-upon contact method during an emergency. Of course, according to Klein's prediction, old Kohler, who didn't know many words, could only use simple symbols to tell him where and when they would meet. To his surprise, it was actually written in neat writing when he opened the letter. With a quick glance, Klein confirmed that it was identical to the handwriting in Daisy's vocabulary book.
Looks like this girl was the one who helped old Kohler write it. This piece of paper doesn't seem to be exposed to moisture. Perhaps old Kohler had bought some in the event he needs to contact me urgently.
Klein opened the door to the living room and read the letter. Only taking off his hat and cane, he leaned his cane against the wall. He didn't take off his coat because the fireplace in the room wasn't lit yet, and the early November cold was silently seeping into his bones. The letter was simple. After all, Daisy didn't know many words either. She thanked the detective for his kindness and good intentions before telling him that she safely returned home, and she finally said, in a tactful way, that she hoped he would bring her vocabulary book with him the next time he came to Eastborough.
What a polite girl.
Klein chuckled. He snapped his fingers and burned the letter, leaving no clues behind. He decided to return to Eastborough the next day and return the book to Daisy, as well as reimburse old Kohler for the cost of the delivery letters, paper, and fountain pens. With this in mind, he couldn't help but sigh and chortle.
Captain, now it's my turn to approve the expense claims of others.
Without wasting any time, he went out again and went straight to the Quelaag Club, where Dr. Aaron was seen more often during Friday afternoons. Klein wanted to ask about Will Ossepton, the child who had played with tarot cards. After entering the Quelaag Club in Hillston Borough, Klein said to the red-vested attendant,
"A cup of Marquis black tea and a serving of dessert. Send it to the corner seat of the main hall. Dr. Aaron, reporter Mike, and the others are sitting there."
Klein had already spotted the relatively cold and famous surgeon, Aaron Series, who was wearing gold-rimmed glasses, as well as reporter Mike Joseph from the Daily Observer, who he had worked with twice and had a pair of charming blue eyes. He also saw the aristocratic equestrian teacher, Talim Dumont, whose frequency of appearing at the club was only second to his. Talim stood up with a smile.
"Oh, our great detective is here, and we happen to be talking about you."
Klein joked.
"Speaking bad things behind my back?"
Mike stood up and shook his hand.
"No, I want to hire you again."
Klein bowed at Dr. Aaron and sat down at their table.
"What's the matter this time?"
Mike chuckled and said,
"I'm sure you've read the papers. Capim has been killed off by the hero bandit Black Emperor and his crimes have been exposed. What a joyous event. And as a reporter, I need to have an acumen for the news. I plan to get a list of names of the girls who were rescued in East Borough from the police department to interview them. Then I'll paint Capim's most cruel, most evil, and most unforgivable side to the readers of the newspaper. Of course, the victims must remain anonymous.
He paused for a moment and suppressed his voice.
I also have a hidden objective, or should I say, I wish to use the interview to know if these girls or their family know any relatively special friends. Who knows, that might be hero bandit Black Emperor.
You found the right person.
The corners of Klein's mouth almost twitched. He smiled at Mike and said,
We've already worked together on East Borough's matters. We have sufficient familiarity and trust, so I have no reason to decline.
Mike stretched out his hand.
I hope for a pleasant partnership. We'll start tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, and we'll be paid the same as last time for a total of £10.
At that moment, Dr. Aaron, who had been listening by the side, said,
Sherlock, I want to hire you as well, this evening or after dinner.
It looks like my business is improving recently.
Klein asked, amused.
Will it conflict with Mike's request?
Aaron shook his head.
No, my luck recently has been pretty good. This makes me suspect that my bout of bad luck was because of that child's inverted Wheel of Fortune card and the words he said. I'm very troubled and puzzled in this regard. I swear to God that I was very nice to him, and I treated him with the best of intentions. Why would he treat me that way? I wish to visit him at his place and confirm that he didn't do it on purpose. However, I'm ultimately afraid that something similar would happen again, or some accident might occur. Therefore, I wish to hire you to protect me. Just for tonight. It won't conflict with Mike's request. How about it?
That's what I wanted to do. After challenging the impossible and doing good deeds, my moral standing has become pretty good. Am I really going to become the king of yellow and black, who wields good luck?
Klein was pleasantly surprised as he said, with a reserved smile.
No problem, we can talk about the remuneration.
City of Silver. Derek Berg once again examined the translucent worm with 12 circles, the remains of Eamon's avatar. He had originally wanted to ask Mr. Fool what this was exactly, but considering how he had already troubled this godlike figure once, he couldn't bring himself to ask as he abandoned this plan. Now he planned on showing it at the next tarot gathering and ask Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and the rest. After hiding the worm, Derek suddenly thought of something. It was about time for the team that had gone with Shepherd Elder Lovia to explore the half-destroyed temple of the fallen creator to return. It wasn't too far from the City of Silver, and it was in a direction that they hadn't set foot in before. He decided to take a look. There were quite a few people he knew among the expedition team. Chapter 385, A Story About Love. Looking at the dark sky being lit up by streaks of lightning, Derek didn't knock on the doors of the few acquaintances he knew. Instead, he walked along the broadest road and walked all the way to the training field at the edge of the City of Silver. After each exploratory team returned, they were forced to stay here for a certain period of time. Not only would it be convenient for them to communicate and report on the things they encountered in the darkness, but they would also be quarantined in a tactful manner to guard against strange things that might latch on to any member's body and suddenly erupt after a certain amount of time. This was the result of the City of Silver's 2,000 years of experience. It wasn't that complicated, but it was quite useful. As soon as he entered the training ground with the axe of Hurricane stuffed behind his waist, Derek Berg's eyes suddenly lit up. He saw the gorgeous Elder Lovia, who seemed to be in her 30s, as well as two familiar faces that were his age. Due to the City of Silver's limited environment, its population was unable to grow any further. The number of people of a certain age group was an adequate number, and although Derek wouldn't dare say he knew all of them, he had seen a majority of them before. He was classmates and partners with some of them during general education classes and on the practice grounds. The person Derek was most familiar with on this expedition team was Dark Regents, who had once been his patrol teammate. The youngster named Dark was of medium height and was slightly chubby. He was strong, optimistic, and cheerful. His face often beamed with a friendly smile. Currently, he was a Sequence 8 gladiator of the Giant Pathway. At this moment, the two parties were separated by a translucent wall that was as hard as steel, making it impossible for them to make any effective form of contact. They had to wait until the members of the exploratory team were confirmed to have no problems before they could meet directly. Derek, who had become silent and withdrawn since the death of his parents, waved to Dark. Noticing this, the gladiator turned his head to the side and looked over. Derek shouted,
Dark, how was it? You didn't encounter any danger, did you?
The material used to create the black wall in that area came from somewhere that wasn't far from the city of Silver and was called dark amber. It was hard as steel, but at the same time, it possessed a certain degree of transparency and had properties that made it good for transmitting sound. Derek's speech went through unobstructed. Derek imagined that Dark would definitely smile brightly and wave his arms out of habit, saying,
Take a look. I'm not injured at all, so shouldn't it be obvious that we didn't meet with any danger? It was nothing.
Hearing his voice, Dark walked a few steps closer to the wall and answered with a smile.
No, everything went smoothly.
Looking at his smile without any fault, Derek suddenly felt a chill run through his body. It was just like he was camping in a ruined tower or a ruined city at night. Darkness was all around him as they accumulated into overwhelming horror. Inside the Quelaag Club, Klein and Dr. Aaron agreed on the remuneration, £2.
I have to say that a doctor's money sure is easy to earn. If it were me in the past, such a request would have cost at most 10 soli.
Klein, who already had the intention to take the mission, sighed in his heart. He remembered that during his time with the Nighthawks, he had heard corpse collector Fry mention that famous doctors had very high incomes. At the time, in a response that was unlike the poet Leonard Mitchell, he said that as far as he knew, if a house was bought in a busy borough in Backland for a storefront, the quickest option would be to turn it into a clinic. They agreed to call on Will Ossepton's place after dinner. It wasn't 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so the equestrian teacher, Talim, gathered the three of them together at a table, and they began playing a game of Upgrade, the game which was invented by Emperor Roselle.
What I expected was to play tennis, practice shooting, flip through the books in the library, and live a healthy life. But why did it become like this?
Klein spontaneously thought in between the card game. Frankly, with his current accomplishments in magic, he could have easily cleared out all the money Dr. Aaron, reporter Mike, and Talim had on them.
But I'm an honest man, and I believe more in my skills and luck.
As the red-vested attendant shuffled the cards, Klein picked up a cream cracker and took a savory bite. He couldn't help but marvel from the bottom of his heart.
This is life.
During the game, Klein noticed one thing. The equestrian teacher, Talim, was no longer in a daze or as upset as he was before.
Has the matter of his friend falling in love with someone he shouldn't have been resolved?
Klein thought curiously as he sipped the Marquis black tea. As a detective, he knew that this wasn't something he should ask in front of others, so he restrained himself and concentrated on his card game. By 5 o'clock, Mike Joseph had to go back to his company, so the game was suspended, and Klein won 5 soli.
My luck has been quite good recently.
While Klein sighed with relief, he saw Dr. Aaron leave the table for the washroom. He controlled his voice and said with a low laugh,
Talim, has your friend's problem been settled?
Talim, who was throwing the cards in his hands onto the table, paused for a second before sighing with a smile.
You could say so.
He added with a certain desire to continue.
Actually, it wasn't too serious. It was because I was thinking too much at the time. Simply put, it was an illustrious young gentleman who fell in love with a commoner. You should know that a man of such status has to marry a noble lady. To him, not even the daughter of a rich man can do.
So that's how it is. To think that I made up all sorts of contrived and bizarre stories, such as falling in love with a man, a monster, or a person that isn't permitted because of moral principles.
Klein was disappointed and said with a laugh,
As far as I know, gentlemen of high society don't mind having a mistress.
Tullim exclaimed with a sigh.
No, Sherlock, you don't understand. Love, do you get it? Love. That young gentleman only wants to marry that commoner woman.
No, I don't understand. I'm just a bachelor dog.
Klein opened his mouth, unable to respond. Tullim sighed to himself.
For the sake of that young gentleman's future, I once thought of asking you to find people with some miraculous abilities to covertly, anyways. I'm a law-abiding citizen, so it was just an idea.
Klein asked with interest.
How was the matter resolved afterward?
Tullim picked up his Highlander coffee and took a sip.
The solution was much simpler than I thought. I went straight to the lady and told her of the dilemma. She sensibly expressed her willingness to leave the gentleman and asked for my help. I must say that she's truly a considerate, kind, refined, and beautiful girl. If it wasn't for the consideration of my identity, perhaps I would have knelt in front of her and kissed the back of her hand.
Klein picked up the golden-rimmed white porcelain cup of black tea and said,
Well, it seems like I couldn't have helped.
As a visitor from Earth, he was completely uninterested in the task of breaking up couples. However, listening to gossip was another matter altogether. After having dinner at the Keylog Club and tasting the limited supply of Sonia lobsters, Klein and Dr. Aaron took the latter's carriage to Will Ossepton's house at 66 Dalton Street in Northborough. This was the address that Dr. Aaron had long since memorized. He didn't return to the hospital to look up the appropriate medical records, and according to Klein's conjecture, any relevant information pertaining to Will Ossepton would likely have been taken away by the Nighthawks.
As a former Nighthawk, I know exactly how they do things.
Klein smiled bitterly and sighed. Pulling the doorbell, the two waited for a while before they saw the door open. A maid in a black and white dress puzzledly asked, Gentlemen, who are you looking for? Seeing that Aaron was still as cold as usual, Klein took the initiative to speak up.
We're looking for Will Ossepton. This is his attending physician. He came back to check on his health.
The maid answered blankly. I don't know him. I've only been here for a few days. I'll get my master. Please wait a moment. While they were waiting, Aaron suddenly said,
I almost believed the reason you came up with just now.
Klein chuckled.
This is a basic quality of being a detective.
At that moment, an old gentleman in his 50s walked to the door and said with a deep voice,
Will Ossepton and his family have already moved away on.
He gave a date. Aaron did a slight count before frowning.
Why would they go through the trouble to move 2 days after being discharged from the hospital after the operation?
He acted like he was really on a follow-up visit. Klein was slightly puzzled and asked,
Sir, how do you know the date so clearly?
Typically speaking, subsequent tenants would only move in after a certain period of time. Twirl, that old gentleman snappily replied.
Someone came to ask before, and I even went to look for the landlord just for that.
The Nighthawks.
Klein asked without much hope.
Do you know where Will Ossepton and his family moved to?
The old man said tersely.
No.
Klein hesitated for a moment before continuing with his questions.
Did they leave anything behind?
The old man took a deep breath and continued.
Some stuff, but they were all taken away by the previous group of people.
Meeting colleagues truly is a helpless matter. They can always think of the things you think of ahead of time.
Klein couldn't help but sigh. Seeing that there were no further clues, Klein and Aaron politely excused themselves and left 66 Dalton Street. Klein turned to Dr. Aaron.
It seems like you'll have to wait a long time before you can resolve your doubts.
Aaron was silent for a few seconds. Then he slowly let out a breath.
After what happened just now, I'm not so troubled anymore. I'm just a doctor, and it's good enough to mind my own affairs. I should return to do a follow-up checkup and not question the situation, what other people think, or why they're not kind. That shouldn't be something I should be concerned with. In the future, I should just try to maintain the relationship between a doctor and a patient, as much as possible.
Klein agreed from the bottom of his heart. Then he casually asked,
It's for the best that you can think this way. At the time, what was wrong with Will Ossepton's left leg?
Dr. Aaron recalled as he said,
His left calf grew a strange tumor that coincidentally formed a ring that pressed down heavily onto his blood vessels. But the kid didn't look too upset, just a little scared, and we wanted to preserve the leg at first, but it was getting worse.
A Chinese phrase describing singles.